food for thought question. Is being in love temporary or long lasting? Is my first question. And then how do you keep it burning? So I worked with a family. I do a parent training with my clients. And I worked with a couple, and they had 3 children, and they were doing this parenting training together. And it's a 10-week session, and I would say maybe 7 weeks into the session, the man made a reference to, well, I'm doing this for her because I don't want to lose her, or made some reference to he was trying to keep them together. And I kind of looked at her, and I'm not a marriage therapist, so I didn't want to get into that whole thing, but I just said quickly to her, I'm wondering why he feels that way. And she said, well, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. And that really struck me, and that made an impact on me, because that made me question how we define love and how we define falling in love and being in love. So my question to you is being in love temporary or long lasting, and how do you keep it burning? And then here's a quote for you. A good marriage can only exist between 2 strong and independent people. Do you agree with that? So, and I know a lot of you are not married, so either from your experience with your parents or with people you know, or what you perceive to be in the future, if you are married, would you agree that you are both strong and independent people, or that a good marriage is only based on those qualities? So share your thoughts with me on that. Okay, so if we're talking about romantic relationships, obviously we're talking about relationships that are different from friendship love. When you get into romantic relationships, you have an increased sense of we-ness. I know that's my little idiom there, but remember when we were talking about the de-escalation of relationships and the elevator analogy, we're going up the flights and down the flights, we talked about how we went from we to you and me. So there's the concept there. We have an increased understanding of it being we or us. We identify with the other. So we don't necessarily identify just as a single person anymore. It's more of both of us together. And we have more discussion of relationship as an entity. So just like we talked about in communication, history between you two is almost like a third element in the communication situation. Well, the relationship between you, if it's a romantic relationship, almost is a third component. So it's its own separate entity. So there's me, there's you, and then there's our relationship. And just kind of an illustration of that, friends don't typically celebrate anniversaries or passage of time. And so while you may say, oh my gosh, I've been friends with you for 10 years, you're likely not going to buy them a gift every year and say, I would do this all over again. I'm so glad that we're still friends. So that does show there's a deeper level there with romantic relationships. Now, the closest relationship that you ever develop will probably be romantic. That's statistically proven. And what's interesting to me is that people like their lovers only slightly more than their friends. So although research shows that the closest relationship you will probably ever form is a romantic one, but there's a very small margin between liking the people that you're in romantic relationships with over your friends. So that's something to ponder. Okay, triangular theory of love. 3 components of this triangular theory. That's good, because tri means 3. There are intimacy, commitment, and passion. So if we're talking about intimacy, some of the things that we can define that with are trust, caring, honesty, supportiveness, understanding, and openness. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Now, if we talk about commitment, we have loyalty, devotion, putting the other first, so other orientation, needing each other. And so that's a second side of the triangle. And then the third side is passion, which is excitement, sexual interest and activity, extreme longing. Now, what's interesting is the passion element is identified as the most important dimension, though each relationship contains varied amounts of each. So, while one relationship may have, if you can't think about this as an equilateral triangle, because then that means all sides would be equal in weight. So you have to think about this as an isosceles triangle. You didn't know you were going to get math lesson today, did you? So you may have a very short commitment side and an extremely long intimacy side, and then, a medium-sized passion. So every relationship is going to have different levels of each, but passion is typically identified as the most important dimension. So passion is usually the longest. Okay, so another theory are the different types of love. And you're getting all kinds of extraneous information this lecture. This is actually based on Old Latin and Greek terms, so you're going to get some, new linguistics here. But eros is a sexual love based on pursuit of beauty and pleasure. So in an eros love relationship, you're craving sexual intimacy. So you may argue that that is an early love or a very primal love. It's truly based on the pursuit of beauty and pleasure. So, I would argue that the younger you are, the more likely you are to fall into the eros category. As we get older, we tend not to crave so much sexual intimacy and, pursue the superficial and, selfish types of pursuits. Then ludus is where love is a game. That's the theory of that type of love. The relationship is based on having fun, and there's not really a long-term commitment. So you might argue that that is, like a rebound fling type of relationship, or a summer fling type of relationship. You go on vacation and meet somebody, and you have lots of fun while you're there, and then you go home to your normal lives. So the ludus type of love tends to be a little more superficial, a little more insignificant. There's really not an expectation that it's going to last. Then the storge love is a friendship love, which this can also include family. It's not sexual, but there may be an attraction component. So remember, we've talked about how intimacy is not necessarily sexual. Attraction is not necessarily sexual either. So there may be an attraction component in that friendship love, but there's not a sexual root of it. Now, the storge friendship love is very stable because it's developed over time. So this is the type of love where you have known the person for a very, very long time, and you have been through the whole gamut of life's ups and downs together, and your friendship is solid and true and tested and stable, and so that type of love is the storge love. Now, there are three other ones as well. There's the mania type of love, where you have really, really crazy high and low swings. So there's almost that obsessive component to it. It's like an insatiable need for attention. And, I can identify, when I hear that description, I think of certain relationships that I know, and their marriage or their relationship, I just say, oh my gosh, that couple is totally the mania love type of people. You have the really extremes. There's not a whole lot of homeostasis. There's not a whole lot of consistency. It's, there's always, I feel like they're kind of addicted to chaos or addicted to drama, that insatiable need for attention. So there's always something going on. There's always something that's big deal. And it's that obsessive, crazy back and forth. That's mania. Then the pragma, that if you think of root words, if you think about the word pragmatic, which is like practical, pragma love is relationship of convenience. So, it works out very well for me to be in a relationship with this person. And it works because it's based on compatibility. So you meet my needs, I meet your needs, and we have a relationship that works. It's convenient, it's helpful, and remember, we tend to be a little bit self-motivated. We want our goals met, our desires met, etc. So if we have a relationship that gives us what we need and we give what the other person needs, it's a pragma type of love, and it works very well. Now, finally, there's the agape type of love. This is the spiritual love. And the idea is you give of yourself without expecting anything in return. And I know there are people that argue that altruism does not exist, because even if you give of yourself without wanting anything in return, you get the affirmation that you've done something for someone else. So it's kind of counterintuitive. There are people that argue that altruism doesn't exist. So But the broad concept of agape love is giving of yourself without expecting anything. It's a deeper type of love, a spiritual type of love. You know, as a Christian, I've grown up learning that agape is the way that God loves us. It's just love in the purest form, similar to the parent-child relationship. You know, when my son was born, you know, they always say a baby changes everything, and it absolutely does. And, you know, you get a deeper understanding of giving of yourself without expecting anything. And so that pure, true love at its, you know, core is what we call agape love. So those are the 6 main theories of love to give you an understanding of the different types of love and relationships that we have. So now let's move into family relationships. So if we think about husbands and wives, we spend a lot of time defining roles. So, and we talked about that, you know, how we have a lot of different perspectives on what roles each one assumes. And when you become a husband and wife rather than just fiancés or, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend, you have to redefine your roles because it changes. And so if we're thinking of spouses, we can think of those relationships classified by communication styles. So if you have a traditional communication style between a husband and wife, it's interdependent, sharing, and stable. And remember, we talked about the difference between interdependency and independent and dependent. So traditional communication style, it's equal sharing, it's stable, rely on each other, trust each other. Independent is psychologically interdependent, but you value independence and space. In other words, for your psychological needs, you rely on the other person, but you value your own personal space, you value your independence. So you operate almost as singles, except for your psychological part of the relationship. And then there's the separate communication style where there's a low interdependence and companionship. In other words, you don't really need or rely on each other that much. You don't really spend that much time together. You know, this may be an arranged marriage, or you know, you've just lost the love over time for whatever reason. So it's almost like coexisting, but only in, you know, legal terms are you married. And then there are mixed communication styles. So if you think about the possible combinations, you know, you can have a variety depending on the relationship. So if we think about parents and children, I want to give you a few questions here. As your parents communicated with you, so you will communicate with your children. Do you believe that? And what views would you naturally